Thank you everyone for tuning into CillaReads tonight. I really do want to give everyone in Paranormal Encounters a huge thank you for allowing me to read their encounters for the next couple of videos. It really means a lot, and I couldn't have done this without you. Hi, I'm a 23 female, and I'm also Indian and Muslim, if that helps. I'm not sure if this fits, but it might. And now I was reading some old stuff I had written about a possible ghost encounter. So back in late 2016, I was 19, and if I remember correctly, it was mid to late November. It was around 7 to 8ish p.m., and I was walking into the kitchen to get a snack. I stopped, thinking I heard someone say my name, and I turned around and looked towards the living room and saw some stranger sitting on my living room sofa. This person was wearing a white anarkali dress. It was definitely a woman because of the dress, and the figure was sitting with one leg over the other, and their elbow was on the leg that was over the other. And I never did get a look at the figure's face though. I then looked away, and I'm not sure I remember why I did. And then I turned to look again, and no one was there. And then a few days later, I was in my front yard, sweeping my walkway, and I crouched down to get something I dropped. And when I lifted my head, I saw someone in front of me. It was a female's figure, and this figure was wearing some pretty kick-ass white high heels and a white anarkali dress, and I immediately recognized it as the dress I had seen a few days prior. I then stood up, but no one was there. So, what do you guys think? Was it possibly a ghost or merely hallucinations? I searched up a woman in white, but it comes back as a story of a woman who died of childbirth and other horrible deaths. I did my week research for a bit after it happened, and then gave up because 1. I was lazy, and 2. I couldn't get any answers that seemed to explain. Also, many articles discouraged the thought of seeing ghosts, nor do I think it was an angel, because all the articles said angels are like a light source. I also didn't really think it's a jinn either, because they typically bother people for fun and stuff, so I've heard and read, but this seemed super harmless. And this is one of many encounters I have had in the years of knowing the paranormal exists, and is personally one of my favorite encounters I have had. I used to work on a ghost tour in St. Augustine, Florida. This was before COVID-19. The tour takes you through St. Augustine on a trolley, and it used to drop the tour off at 2 locations: Potter's Wax Museum, oldest drugstore, and the Old St. John's Country Jail. While I have had experiences in the jail, I even was able to investigate it thanks to a new tour being offered, but this is another tale. This particular experience happened in the Wax Museum. In the Wax Museum, there is a part where an executioner tells the story of a pirate who survived his execution. This was one of the roles I played during my time there. After briefing, I would be taken to the museum to set up for the night. This involved setting up props in the room where the story is being told, as well as setting up small electronic candles around to set the mood, and to illuminate some more well-known wax figures. If I had time after setting up before the first group arrived, I would explore the museum to kill time. There was a part of the museum that was not illuminated by these small electronic candles, due to the fact that you could not see the area from the outside hall where the group would exit. This area had our Hall of Presidents. I normally never got a chance to check that area out, as the first group would arrive pretty quickly. This was one of those nights where everything was running a tad bit behind. I was pretty used to the strange feelings of being watched and random noises and cold spots in the building, so I strolled into the area without a second thought. At the end of the Hall of Presidents, there is a wax figure of Sam Houston. In life, Houston was about 6'6", and all of the wax figures were built to be lifelike, so that included their height. For comparison, for further along in the story, I am 5'9", so he towered over me. I had looked down the hall before, during moments in between groups, but never did explore down there. I was quite familiar with how it normally looked in the small bit of light. As I started to walk down the hall, I did notice that the wax figure of Sam Houston seemed to look a lot darker than it normally did. I had just assumed it was my eyes playing tricks on me, and they adjusted themselves to the lack of light. As I started to walk down the hall, I got a very weird sensation that almost made me want to stop and to turn around. I ignored it, as I assumed it was just a primal fear of the dark kicking in. I probably should have listened to that feeling. I go about halfway down the hall when Sam turned to face me. It was at this point I noticed that what I was looking at was not the wax figure, but a 6'6" tall black mass in the shape of Sam Houston. I didn't get much more than a few seconds to register what I was seeing before Sam started to charge right at me. Flight or fight kicked in, and I jumped backwards in shock right before Sam ran into me. I'm honestly surprised I didn't fall over as I jumped back, given how quickly I did. Sam vanished right before it made contact with me as I jumped back, and while my mind was trying to make sense of what my eyes had witnessed, I was letting out some very strong curse words at whatever this entity was. This was not the only encounter I have had here. There are multiple spirits in that place as the building was built upon an ancient Native American burial ground. I am confident I know which one of these spirits decided to have a go at me that night. There are two spirits who like to antagonize the living there. A man in 1800s era style clothing with a distinctive top hat and a woman in a white nightgown, possibly late 1800s to early 1900s. I have a feeling it was the male spirit, as he tended to be more aggressive than his female companion. And there was also a mimic there who liked to especially mimic one tour guide we had. When I was 7 or 8 years old, I lived in a small town on the west coast of the United States. It was a big old blue house, a block from the water treatment plant, and we had a huge dirt hill behind our house. One summer afternoon, I was playing with toys in my bedroom while my stepdad fixed my bike. After a little while, I heard scratching inside my wall. I just assumed it was a rat or something and ignored it and went back to my toys. A few minutes later, what felt like a hand grabbed my right ankle, but when I looked, nothing was there. It pulled me closer and closer to the wall. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. Just as my foot touched the wall, my mom came in. As she stepped through the doorway, the feeling of the hand disappeared, and I was back in the middle of the room, still laying on my stomach. She asked what was wrong. I looked scared. I told her what happened, and she looked at the wall I was being pulled towards. There were two impressions on the wall, one of my shoe, and the other a handprint. As soon as I saw that, I yanked up my pants leg and looked at my leg. You could still see the finger marks on my leg. This is just the first of very many things that I've experienced. Another time, there was a knock on our front door about midnight, and they just kept knocking. My stepdad answered the door to find an old 1800s boot sitting there. When he closed the door, the knocking started again. We never did find out what caused it, but when he put those shoes in his shop at work, it never happened again. In that house and surrounding land, I had hundreds of experiences. Here is another one. My sister, myself, and some other kids started a club called Kidville Detectives. My mom would hide clues and set up various cases for us in the beginning, but that soon grew to other parents asking us to find lost things, figure out who was breaking the wooden fence in the middle of the block, and things like that. A few months later, the police came to our fort that my stepdad built for our office and asked if we could investigate a car that sped down the same section of the highway every day at the same time. We started out sitting in lawn chairs in the middle of the section of road, but off to the side so we would be safe. Sure enough, this old blue two-door car comes along out of nowhere really fast, as I guess 80 miles per hour plus, and just before the hill it vanished. No sign of it. We watched like this for a week, trying different places to see if we could figure out where it went. Eventually, we found that it vanished at the exact same spot every time, so we started checking along the sides of the road there and found half buried and totally covered in tall grass and weeds, a car totally rusted, all the glass long broken, and its paint long gone. The passenger seat we could see inside was old and cracked and looked like animals had used it for a den. When we finally got to the driver's side, we found the reason for the phantom car. The driver was still behind the wheel, one bone hand on the steering wheel and the other missing, I'm guessing taken by said animals, and the skull sitting where the lap would have been if there were any flesh left at all. We called the officer that asked us to investigate and told him what we found. Not much later that same day, they shut down the highway in that spot and dug the car out of the ditch. I was watching from an overlooking hill and saw the phantom car speeding through the closed section of highway. Just as they pulled the car free from the ditch, it vanished in the usual place just as it approached the dirty, rusty car. Over the next few weeks, the phantom car made its daily trip exactly as before. The police still hadn't identified the driver, as they contacted the registered owner, last registered 15 years earlier, and the car had in fact been stolen and never recovered. About a month after, we learned that the county decided to give the body a proper burial. On the tiny metal marker at the cemetery, it just said, John Doe, nothing else. After the burial, the phantom car was never seen again. I was raised in a dysfunctional Christian home, too young for me to remember, but my mom told me I'd have bad nightmares where I'd wake up screaming. I had mentioned to her that I saw shadow people. She would pray and bless the house, but even when we moved, I still see them. It wasn't until I was a teenager when I could hear them at times. I had an experience one winter morning where I heard my dad's footsteps come down the stairs into the kitchen before going, bah, behind me. I turned around to say, Dad, you scared me, but I didn't even get the first word out. I turned around to see nothing there. I crept up the stairs to my parents' bedroom, and both of them were in bed asleep. I stopped hearing and seeing anything since moving out. At this point, I have to wonder if these shadows were just attracted to the negativity of my home. Like I said, I was Christian raised, but it wasn't healthy. My parents were both mentally ill, one not diagnosed until much later, and they never should have stayed together as long as they did. I've heard some things cling to that stuff. I don't know. I used to work at a care facility for mentally disabled people who had also been to prison. The facility was basically a rehab center, but it's also fairly dangerous to work there if the clients don't like you. Luckily, they liked me okay, because I was one of the few who actually cared about their well-being and not just the paycheck. The first facility had 2 apartments across from one another with a wide hallway in between. I was sitting in one apartment, and the doors to both apartments were open in case there was an incident. I was sitting on a couch when I suddenly heard one of the clients in the other apartment speaking, and everyone else is silent. It took me a moment to realize he was asking a question, and when I registered the question, I felt suddenly cold and my chest became heavy, making it hard to breathe. For some context, that client had been into ghosts over the last month or so and got an app that makes it so ghosts can communicate with you. It was like one of those ghost hunter devices where they ask a question, then play the audio back, and you can hear the ghost speaking. So bad vibes just hit me. I immediately silently prayed to God to send angels down to our apartment to protect us from any harmful spirits the clients brought into the area. Right after, I felt a sense of peace, and the bad cold feeling lifted, and I could breathe. I could sense several angels standing around the room, one next to me, between me and the hall door, another in the kitchen by one of my clients, and the others in the rest of the apartment. It was an incredibly reassuring feeling, and I felt peaceful. But I worried about my coworker and the clients in the other apartment, and after a moment, I got up and walked into the hallway. I got about 3 feet away from the doorway when I felt like I'd run into a brick wall, and my chest felt heavy again. But more than that, and a big reason I never got any closer, was that I could sense a bad spirit pacing before their doorway. It was a man. I had an impersonation of what he looked like, but most notably were his eyes. They were red, like glowing red. He looked up at me and slowed in his pacing when I came close, stopping before me. I forced myself to breathe deeply and steadily and pretended I didn't notice him. Generally, it's better to pretend nothing is wrong. You don't see them. It is situational though. I waited until I caught my coworker's eye and waved her over. She excused herself and came over. I didn't tell her outright what was up. I got the impression that she needed to actually feel what was wrong and not just be told. I pointed out the apartment I was overseeing. This'll sound a little silly, but can you go step into the other apartment and stand there for a minute, then come back? She looked a little confused, but nodded and did as I said. She stood in the other apartment for a good minute, before looking around, as though in amazement. I waited, aware the bad spirit was giving me quite the burning glare, but I just watched my coworker and continued to ignore it. She came back after a moment, her shoulders relaxed, and amazement still on her face. She stopped, where the brick wall was. Without so much as a word from me, she stared at me and said, "Whoa. Do you feel that?" I asked. I wasn't at all accusatory, mind, just confirming. "Yes," she said, then took a deep breath. "I feel like I can't breathe." "I think your ghost app is bringing in bad spirits. There's one that has been pacing in front of the apartment doorway." She went really pale, and I went on. "I prayed for angels to come guard us over there." I pointed at my apartment, "which is why it feels so much lighter and peaceful." "Holy shit, I noticed." She was fully alarmed now. "What should I do?" I indicated her apartment. "Try and distract the clients. Maybe get a card or board game or another activity started. Try and steer them away from anything to do with contacting ghosts from now on, because that stuff just invites them in." "Yeah, for sure. What about the bad spirit?" At this point, I was pretty pissed at the bad spirit, not counting how it was currently baring its teeth at me in rage at being called out. It could stand there and be as angry as it wanted, but I would not allow it to hurt anyone. "I'll ask for some angels to come escort it out, and have some come stand guard in this apartment as well." She was really relieved and thanked me before hurrying into the apartment to her clients. I ignored the bad spirit and went back to my apartment and stood in the protected space for a moment as my coworker redirected her client's attention to a card game. When they were distracted, I prayed again silently for angels to escort the bad spirit out, and for the angels to guard the other apartment and the clients and coworkers there. When they were distracted, I prayed again silently for angels to escort the bad spirit out, and for the angels to guard the other apartment and the clients and coworkers there. I sensed 2 angels arriving on either side of the bad spirit, and they began leading it away. I moved further into the hallway, halfway between the apartments, keeping my eyes on them as they went. I sensed angels taking up positions in the other apartment. I don't really understand this next part. Maybe it has to do with someone actively noping a bad spirit out of a space. I'm not really sure, but the angels and bad spirits stopped at the exit of the facility, so I went and opened the door wide. They passed through the doorway, and a few feet past the threshold, disappeared. I shut the door and went and checked on my coworker and her clients. Everything was peaceful there, and she gave me a relieved nod before returning to their card game. I went back to my area, sending a prayer of thanks to God and the angels for their guidance and protection.